Yep.
So morning, everyone. My name's Cheryl. I'm from the Pioneer Business Association, and thank you very much for joining us for this seminar on funding for sustainable projects. I'm going to let Josephine from Toy2 introduce our speakers this morning. And for any of your colleagues, this will be available online on our website afterwards to share. So over to you, Joey.
Oh, thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. So as Cheryl said, my name's Josephine and I'm from Toy2 EnviroCare. I'm also a board member at the Parnell Business Association. I'm delighted to be able to welcome this series of sustainability focused webinars, and great that we're using webinar technology. And so today was seamless for us, no last minute panics of shifting platforms or venues. So last month we talked about how you measure and reduce a carbon footprint, and we saw from some of the carbon footprints that energy and transportation have huge emissions associated with them. So actually they're a really great place to start. But however, for companies trying to switch fuel sources or electrifying your fleet actually costs a lot of money. So today we're going to share with you some of the government funds and grants and support that's actually available, and that'll help you decarbonize your business. After the first speaker, we're then going to hear a little bit about how you can leverage your buying power to support your favorite charities as well. So I'm going to introduce all three speakers to you. So first, I've got the pleasure of welcoming Dr. David Hewison and David Hay. They are both low carbon activators for the Puketipapa and Waitemata local boards. Grant is a lawyer specialising in local government, environment and regulatory matters, but also runs a policy consultancy business. He's got a PhD in law from Auckland Uni, and David has extensive experience as a policy analyst, business analyst and project manager in central and local government. David has a Masters of Public Policy from Vic Uni and a BCom BA from Auckland Uni. We're going to hear from Grant first, as I mentioned. After Grant, I will then do a short intro of our second speaker in the order which is Colin, but we'll go to Grant first. So over to you, Grant.
Thank you, Josephine. Kia ora koutou. So I'll just load up the screen I'm operating from, and we can run through this PowerPoint. So look, thanks Cheryl very much for the opportunity for the Waitemata low carbon activators to be involved in the seminar. So what we're being tasked to do from the Waitemata local board is run a range of projects to try and activate climate change thinking, low carbon thinking, and get little projects up and running across the Waitemata local board area. In particular, we've been keen to work with business associations because they provide a really good structure. They're well connected to the business community, but also the community generally, and have, as Cheryl has demonstrated, real aspirations to move us in the right direction in terms of low carbon and sustainability. So we're really pleased to be here. In some ways, the way in which the funding opportunities work, particularly with Auckland Council, is around communities working on these projects alongside or as well as individual businesses. So just kind of bear in mind as we work through this that there are some opportunities for Parnell as a kind of community to be involved in these funding opportunities as well, and to work with the businesses within Parnell to bring some of these to fruition. So I just wanted to look first across a range of funding opportunities within Auckland Council, particularly at the local level, the Waitemata local board grants. If you operate or want to operate outside that local board, there are opportunities for what are called multi-board grants across a variety of local boards. For example, Ōrākei, right next to Waitemata and kind of in a way interfaced with Parnell, might be a board that naturally would want to be involved in some of these ideas as well. There are some regional grants that are available, the Waste Minimisation Innovation Fund and the Regional Environmental and Natural Heritage Grants. And for those of you who are thinking along these lines, bear in mind that those two grants are still open. They only happen annually. They will close on Friday, but they're not too difficult to put applications through to. So bear in mind there are opportunities to put in some ideas as we go. And in fact, I think Colin, our second speaker, is going to speak to some of those in terms of he wants to look at some of those as opportunities. So very quickly, the Waitemata Local Board and multi-board grants, they have 4 rounds a year, so there are opportunities to look to funding on a kind of annual basis. And if you're not quite ready for one of the regional ones, then looking at some of these local ones as they come up through the year or as new ideas emerge is a real opportunity. There are kind of 2 styles. One are called local grants, which are between 3,000 to 10,000, so they're a bit larger. And there are quick response grants under 2,000. So it might be that you want a trial, a feasibility idea, and look to something a little bit smaller in terms of funding. But certainly that 3,000 to 10,000 grant range is available as well. The grants are open to businesses, but the Waitemata Local Board does tend to want to see applications from kind of hybrid organisations. So a not-for-profit working alongside businesses, voluntary organisations working alongside businesses, then perhaps businesses just themselves. Without getting into too much detail on what the grants are generally sought for that are successful, it's things like professional fees or volunteer expenses, administration expenses, costs for service delivery, marketing, advertising, website printing costs, those sorts of things, and not really salaries. So the idea is to help or assist businesses or community organizations that are largely covering the costs of their time with the sort of things that they need to get a particular project going. They don't fund the same project more than once in a financial year. So if you do have an idea and you think it really might fit into that larger funding category, then perhaps wait for that, or shift and change your idea. So it might be a little feasibility study, and then your larger idea is something a little bit different. The kind of things that the Waitemata Local Board is looking for local grants applications for are focused in the area that we're particularly interested in. So they're looking for ideas about Waitemata being a low carbon community, minimizing waste. They haven't received, as I reviewed, a lot in that space over the last year or so. So there are some opportunities there of thinking along those lines. Transport, walking, cycling, micro-mobility areas, regenerative economic ideas, particularly from businesses, and overall kind of community action for climate change. So in terms of what's available there, I think it really aligns with the sort of work that Cheryl's promoting in terms of sustainability. So they're looking for some good ideas is basically what I can see from businesses and from the community. Recently, they've funded sustainable urban living workshops. They've funded repair cafe events. They've funded composting bins and purchase of native plants and planting and those sorts of things as well. So there's a range of things there that they've recently funded, but I think they're open particularly to some innovative, interesting ideas from businesses. In terms of the regional funds, the Waste Minimisation Innovation Fund is one that does and has in the past funded quite a range of businesses do some very innovative things along the waste minimisation front. So what this fund does is essentially supports the council's waste management and minimisation fund. It has some kind of priorities at the moment. It's particularly interested in how to address construction and demolition waste. So if you've got some ideas along those lines, I think they're particularly receptive to those at the moment. In the past, they've funded those sorts of things on Waiheke, particularly trying to divert quite a large amount of construction waste from Waiheke away from landfill. They've done a similar thing in the urban area, supporting Habitat for Humanity, actually employ a construction demolition procurement manager. They've supported some interesting ideas from innovative businesses, one called MedSalve, which was processing or reprocessing single-use medical devices. So their idea was to take those sort of single-use medical devices that are used, and instead of throwing them basically into landfill, to try and reprocess or reuse them. They have funded businesses doing waste and worm farming. So there's some sort of interesting ideas there that might be available to a community such as Parnell. And they funded Geocon Terrazzo Limited to recycle marble and granite waste from their processing or other people's processing. So some quite different range of projects that have got funding under that Waste Minimisation Fund. A new fund that's open for the first time, and I think we'll be looking for ideas that, if you like, come a little bit out of left field, is the new aspect of the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage funds called the Sustainable Living Projects Fund. So this is the first time it's been open, and it's quite broad in what they're looking for across transport, across the way in which people shop, the way in which people eat food, the way in which people are basically interacting in this sustainable space. So again, I think that's certainly something to think about if you're wanting to run a project, because they'll be open to some really new ideas at this stage. So look, overall, I think I just encourage people to think along those lines. Those funds do fund businesses. And also I think there's opportunities for Parnell in the wider sense to be perhaps looking for some of these funds to fund kind of community/business projects. So thanks very much, Josephine. That's probably enough from me, and we'll pass it back to you to probably pass to Colin.
Josephine, your mic's not on, hun.
Thank you, Cheryl. So next, thank you, Grant. That was really good. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Colin, who is the CFO at Razor International. And Colin's going to talk to us, as we mentioned, a bit about some funding, but also he's got a really cool organization that really helps you leverage your buying power and by supporting charities. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you for that introduction, Josephine, and great start, Grant. Hi, everyone. My name is Colin. I'll just share my screen and we'll get cracking, all right. Did that work off the bat? Okay. Can everyone see that?
Nope.
Nope, we can't. 1 second. Share screen. Sure.
There you go.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to start off by apologizing for the lockdown beard. Although I found as we move into spring, it happens to be one of the more sustainable ways to keep warm this season. And I highly recommend that each and every one of you try it. I'm here today to talk about an initiative called Green Insurance. And as Josephine mentioned, it's a way to leverage your procurement and pay for some sustainability initiatives that you might want to pursue. Quick background on our business. I represent a company called Razor that my brother and I founded. It is a social enterprise, which unfortunately is a word tossed around entirely too often. But it's the best way to describe it. Our reason for being is to find sustainable income streams for social and environmental causes. And we've really honed in on a niche that we call spending giving. So this is where individuals, households, businesses, and charities themselves will leverage their own spend and earn some portion of margin or commission to spend towards these social or environmental causes. Initially, charities were our primary beneficiary, but actually after attending the first sustainability seminar at the JASMAX building with the Parnell Business Association, I think this was back in February or so, Josephine got up there and she explained, you know, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there around climate change. But in fact, there's actually quite a bit of hope around how can you play your part. So my brother and I stepped back and we thought, how do we fit into this conversation? So we made a mild pivot on one of our initiatives called Insurance for Good and created Green Insurance. So what is Green Insurance? It's a commercial insurance product. So it's for businesses created in partnership with Crombie Lockwood. Crombie Lockwood would be the largest insurance broker in New Zealand by premium volume. The proposition is relatively straightforward. For each new client policy that we're able to sign up through the program, you can earn 20% of the broker commission every year you participate to pay for a sustainability goal. Now, this might include a digital emissions tracker subscription. This could be a formal carbon emissions audit, or perhaps you already know your carbon footprint and are now looking at offsetting and might want to purchase carbon credits. Or we could even extend through to native tree and bush planting programs. All of this is implemented through our partnerships. So Crombie Lockwood being the insurance brokers, Trees That Count for the native tree and bush planting initiatives, and Toitu for the formal audits or carbon inventory management or carbon credits. It's important to note here that this program through Crombie Lockwood comes at no additional cost to the client. Crombie Lockwood still have their fiduciary duty, where they have a responsibility to do right by the client, assess their risk, and put forward recommendations that are not only business fit and purpose, but also right-sized and right-priced. While of course we don't make any guarantees here, typically we're seeing clients are improving cover and often saving money at the same time. So once we reach a commercial conclusion like that, it becomes a little bit of a no-brainer. So as I mentioned, all of this was born out of a pivot from originally what was more of a charity driven product, going under another brand called Insurance for Good. We're not that creative at Razor, so our names are pretty straightforward. But through our first year, we managed to raise around $52,000 for New Zealand charities in annual recurring donations. And this is just the start through what was arguably quite an intermittent year with the sprinkling of lockdowns. But we've saved these organizations significantly more, which would include charities themselves. And where it makes sense, we'll take a photo with the big check and hand it over and introduce the parties, and that makes it kind of fun. Dr. Hewson was mentioning earlier around some of this grant making process, and after I was introduced to him and David, I recognized that perhaps even my own business could apply for some of these grants. So I was looking at the Sustainable Living Project grant.
Yep.
And I've been applying for that this week. It's taken about a day, but it looks like something that could provide some very useful funding to help me grow this program and raise more awareness around using people's procurement towards sustainability initiatives. Also, I saw one thing too with the waste management grant. That actually is extended a further 7 days. So I believe that closes midnight next Friday.
Okay.
And back over to you, Josephine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Colin. That was awesome. And I hadn't realized that our green drinks had given you such an aha moment. So so that's great. So thank you very much. So last but I'm sure not least, I'd like to hand over to David, our last speaker. And please use the chat for any questions, or we'll have open mics at the end.
Thank you, Josephine. I think that Colin's presentation is interesting, that there is, from the sense there are business opportunities in and around this that that can leverage government support and funding support. So it's not all down to the government, and it's never going to be. But what I'll do is run through a few things, and just to really fairly lightly once over, to give you a sense of what's out there. And rather than broader sustainability issues, I'll focus more on carbon reduction, because we've got to keep this into time somehow. So there's a few things there. So I think the first place to really look is always at the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, or ECA. The website URL is on the bottom of the screen there, and there's 8 different funds there. some of which are probably not less relevant to business. I'm going to avoid the innovation and insulation and heater grants because they give grants for gas-fired heaters, which emit carbon. So I'm not interested in that. And we'll just go through the ones that are highlighted, that I've highlighted there. This is just a screenshot of their website. So it's a little bit of a guided tour. Really, the big one is the government investment in decarbonising industry, or GIDI fund, $69 million contestable fund. The focus is on industrial and manufacturing. So if you're drying a few million kilograms of or tons of milk powder each year and you're using coal to do that, they will help you get off coal, essentially. So that's possibly of less immediate relevance to the Parnell business community, but you know, you might be working with people that could be interested in this. So I think it's worth mentioning. Process heat is responsible after transport is the second most significant emitter of CO2 in New Zealand. So it's quite a large chunk of decarbonisation effort needs to go into that. Technology demonstration is quite an interesting one, I think. The two sort of subcategories, early adoption of a proven technology that has been proven, I guess, elsewhere in the world, or innovation yet to be widely deployed in New Zealand. So these are existing technologies that you could demonstrate could work here. Co-funding of 40% of costs, generally limited to $100,000. They use co-funding throughout this. I think it means subsidy. But, you know, subsidy is a word we don't like to use these days. So we say co-funding instead. But I think that is an area where, you know, if a business has outreach around the world, or you've been overseas and seen something that works and go, well, why aren't we doing that here? Then there's an opportunity to get some funding to show that it could be done here and to prove the case for using it. So I think that would have some merit. Energy and carbon reduction. So there's actually, within this category, there are, again, 7 subcategories. So again, some subsidy of the energy audit, perhaps paying 50% of a graduate salary, capped at $70,000 over 2 years. Co-funding up to 40% for an expert energy management plan. So there's feasibility studies and business case studies, design advice, and install a system that helps you monitor how you're using energy and target the aspects of energy use that could be improved. So there's a range of bits and pieces in there which are worth exploring. The low emission vehicle contestable fund is now closed after 10 rounds. That was $6.5 million per year for projects to help accelerate the uptake of low emissions vehicles. I think this may have been overtaken now by the vehicle import subsidy, or the new electric vehicle subsidy that is available, or has just recently become available. So I'm not sure that this one will have an ongoing life. But there certainly is you know, going to be ongoing government support for electrification of vehicles fleets. I think you could keep an eye on that. The Energy Transition Accelerator, again, this is for larger businesses, councils, district health boards, universities, and it's a 40% of the Energy Transition Accelerator Opportunities Assessment. So an expert will help you into long-term pathway to emissions reduction by identifying technically and economically viable decisions and investments. This is more along the kind of funded support rather than direct support for your own initiative. But still, and again, it is targeted at large businesses and councils. But if you're working with any of these people, then this is just something that might trigger a thought and be useful to push forward. So that is a rough overview of what ECA does. Again, it's about energy efficiency and conservation, which has a huge overlap with carbon emissions reduction. But as I said at the beginning, there are a few things where using energy more efficiently doesn't necessarily reduce carbon emissions, such as gas heaters and gas cookers. So, you know, if your mission is to reduce your carbon footprint, just be a little bit aware of that. So we'll move on to Callaghan Innovation. So this is more in the research and development funding space, and perhaps to develop research and development, new initiatives and products, innovations, and to take them to market. And again, they have a range of things and a very good website. So these are not necessarily related to climate or energy. I note that their Auckland office is within your area at 1 Watt Street, Parnell. So, you know, they're in the hood. Possibly be a good thing to go and visit them. The ones that caught my eye in their R&D funding is the Getting Started grants. So that this is, you've got an idea that is formulated but needs to take that next step into commercialization. So you've got your proof of concept, but the development into actually commercial saleable product is the hurdle that needs to be overcome. There are grants to employ students at 3 different levels. So a student internship, perhaps a summer holiday for an undergraduate, then you might want to hook up with the university to involve master's or PhD students doing a research project in working on your business, with your business. And then there's a pathway for hiring those students once they have graduated. And there's a grant to support that as well. They have project grants, and there's an annual contestable fund for those. Again, typically 40%, and it's eligible research and development projects. And then, of course, there's a research and development tax incentive, and you go through Inland Revenue Department for that, but Callaghan Innovation does have some useful information about that on their website as well, and that's a 15% tax credit on investments in R&D. And again, you know, none of this is necessarily related to climate change or energy efficiency, but if you have a really good idea in that space, or for a you know, something in the broader sustainability space, certainly that, and it's innovative and needs some research and development work, these are the people to talk to. And then finally, the MB, the Ministry of Business, Industry and Enterprise, I think, you know, all those good words together. They have a website, and the link again is at the bottom there, www.tools.business.govt.nz/climate/. And this was being put together with MB and the Sustainable Business Network. And you can go on there, and this is, you know, there's no actual funding attached to this, but this is a good starting place to get a guide on where you could make most impact and how to do it. So it's got quite an interesting sort of expert analysis kind of function there. You click that big red button and it asks you a series of questions about your business, and then through doing that, focuses in on a set of recommendations for action that you might want to take. I personally found that slightly annoying. Just wanted the information, thanks. But there is a page there where called Climate Toolbox further down that page where you can just go straight to the area of interest to you. So they cover 5 areas: the moving people, moving goods, your office operations, site operations and equipment, and designing new products or designing your products. It's not just sort of technical, but they delve into, how do you bring about behavioral change, both in your business, with your staff, with your customers. They're quite sort of broad in their business approach, and I think that's extremely useful. It's a quick guide through to checklist of, yes, am I communicating this well? Have I created incentives that are going to work? How do I make this transition or this project? How do I ensure that it's actually going to succeed and it isn't just a good idea? So there's a lot of very good, well thought out advice on that page. I recommend it. And finally, here I am keeping to time, Cheryl. Where to next? So, I'm a policy geek, so I read these documents like the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Amendment Act 2019 and give presentations and lectures on it. So just very briefly, the Zero Carbon Act means that the Minister for Climate Change, currently James Shaw, must produce plans for emissions reduction and for adaptation. Now, either of these might conceptually include further support and or funding for business. And they're coming down the pipeline. So after the Climate Change Commission delivered its final report earlier this year, the next step in the process under the legislation is that the Minister must prepare and publish a plan based on that advice. And we should see that sometime soon or later this year. And that will set an agenda which the government is not actually legally obliged to pursue, but it will set up the range of intentions that and policy changes that the government might make in terms of emissions reduction. The other part of the Zero Carbon Act is adaptation. So emissions reduction was the Paris Climate Conference in 2015 and our undertakings under that. Adaptation was Cancun in 2010, where governments around the world acknowledged that climate change is a real thing that's happening and it is having consequences and is going to continue to have consequences that we can't avoid. So we have to adapt to those. So a first national risk assessment was completed in August 2020, and a national adaptation plan is due by August next year. And again, that will possibly have impacts on business, both in terms of opportunities and issues that you might want to respond to or address. And that pretty much covers that space. Thank you very much. I have to work out how to turn off screen sharing now.
Just go stop sharing, David.
It's on the other screen, that's why. There we go. All right, thank you.
Guys. Thank you both. Thank you, all three of you, actually, for 3 really interesting presentations. Joey, just before we open questions, I just wanted to alert to the fact that when you look at some of these applications, probably best to touch base with somebody like Grant or David before you apply for any of them, because we actually applied for the waste minimisation grant a year ago in order to try and do an assessment on organic food waste and composting for some of our businesses. And when we reapplied this year to extend it to further businesses, we were told, no, it's seed funding and we cannot repeat the same project twice. So although we were extending it to new businesses, they wouldn't grant it. So just be careful in the sense that it might sometimes be better to apply to the local board. Sometimes it might be better to apply for one of these grants. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to do a little bit of research, because we got caught out on that. Joey, anything from your side?
No, I thought that was really good. Thank you. And I think quite often there's grants available, but people just don't know about them. And so, you know, obviously highlighting it and sharing these resources is really useful. I guess from a SME business, Parnell's made up of quite a number of small businesses. Are there any, probably more from the wider Matar, but some small initiatives that you're aware of that you think some of the Parnell businesses might be able to be involved with?
Well, that might be a question for me, Josephine. So I suppose part of the thing today is we were trying to keep to this kind of really narrow time frame. So the simple answer is yes, there are. And I've talked to Cheryl about the opportunity of particularly inviting Auckland Unlimited to be involved a bit later in the seminar series, because they're running a range of different kind of projects, and also they've got new funding available through the long-term plan to run some new projects too. So I think there's some opportunities to bring them in to the picture. NZTE runs business sustainability programs as well directly that are subsidized, if you like, or that have this co-funding. So it's in a way, I think the different funding opportunities sort of suit different ideas. So if it's about you and your business looking to enhance your sustainability itself, and perhaps project that to your customers and to perhaps those that are you procure from or procure from you, then there are a range of different places you can do that to smarten yourself up. You can do it yourself, but you can actually go to a range of partners. David mentioned some, ECA, MB, Auckland Unlimited, NZTE, to kind of take your Callaghan Innovation to take yourself to another level. If it's about a particular project or a particular product or a particular service that you think is really innovative in this space, then there's a range of kind of graduated ways in which you can do that as well, through and get support from those central government agencies. And if it fits within that sort of Auckland Council, Live Lightly, and particularly waste minimisation, then certainly there are businesses who have been successful in having smaller feasibility type studies done and then growing those over time. And Cheryl, look, I agree that some of the way in which the funding is approached by the people who look at the applications at the other end isn't all that transparent. So you probably do need to have some conversations with them if you can, and get the idea of how you take a small project, get that perhaps funded or co-funded, and then take it to a larger project without kind of failing their internal tests of that. But Cheryl, as you say, maybe the way to start with, you've got a very small project, is with the local board funding. And certainly they want to prioritize low carbon. So they're looking for interesting projects. See if that gets funded and works, and then that might be something you then take on to one of the regional funds, or take on to central government. Yeah. Sorry, that Josephine, that's a very long-winded way of saying kind of, it's a New Zealand approach. We don't make it really simple, and there's not one website you can go to that just says, here is how it all works. And if you're new to this, here are the things you need to really think about and graduate your way through. You've got to kind of go and find all those. So I'm hoping we did a bit of that bringing together today, but look, it might be something we Cheryl, if you keep running these, we come back on an annual basis at some point and just refresh it and let you know what's worked and what hasn't, and what's new. David's also right. Look, the government is going to produce some plans this year and next year that are not only challenges to business, but I actually think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in there for businesses to open those plans up and say, wow, here's a business opportunity. I do something in that space, and the government is going to look to not only fund that itself, but it's going to look to try and make those sorts of projects meet its goals in reducing carbon.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, although some of the Parnell businesses are not huge on that industrial scale, you do have firms like Jazzmax, you know, advertising. You're working with clients that are at scale, and bringing some of that thinking into the conversations with your clients about what would benefit them, how you can help them, you know, bring innovation into the space. So having some knowledge of the funds from that perspective, you know, might be a sort of business opportunity, a way of pushing forward that agenda within your own business, and how you frame your offering to the market. So having an awareness of the funds and the opportunities from that perspective, I think would be useful. If you, I guess one of the things that I've found working with a couple of NGOs around Auckland on putting in funding applications is not everybody understands the bureaucrat speak that's embedded in those documents. Me and Grant are fluent in bureaucrat speak, and we can always help you sort of interpret what the requirement is. So I had one that there's a little section in one of these funds that was about Maori involvement, Maori engagement, and they had answered none. And I went, oh, no, you don't want to do that. You know, here's some words and how you can tick a box to make sure that you don't just fall over at that hurdle, and that your application will be taken seriously. So, you know, little things like that, just we can offer some assistance.
And also congrats, Colin, on your project. I personally use the breast cancer card, you know, knowing that the money would go towards that. And I just think there's a lot that's going to happen in that space. Our next seminar is actually going to be on ethical investing. And in a sense, you kind of cross over into that area where people, I believe, are certainly starting to make choices in that space in terms of where their money's invested. So that will be our next one up.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. We've seen a growing demand, and it seems to be one of the ways that people prefer to donate is through their spending decisions. So we're just trying to constantly expand that, and particularly in the B2B space. So while insurance is something we're starting with, more to come.
Colin, I've just got a question for you, just around quantum. If I was paying a premium of $50,000 a year, what could I expect to contribute into the fund?
That's a good question. So rough math, and it always depends on what sort of insurance you're buying. We would expect probably $2,000 to $3,000 off a policy like that to be contributed every year. But of course, it varies case to case, but that's probably a rough amount. And we know that would cover a carbon assess inventory management system year on year, and could partially fund an audit depending on the size of your business as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's significant, and you know, insurance is expensive, so it's nice to think that you know what you're spending is going to other good as well.
Yeah, thank you. And fortunately, we have great partners in that space too. Probably absolutely stand beside this, and it's not only been a good business, but it's been good for business too. So they're an absolutely committed partner right from the top.
We had a little bit of a discussion with Colin about whether there might be an opportunity, and you know, it's very tentative at this stage of almost establishing a Parnell, you know, trust dedicated to kind of sustainability projects within Parnell, and then inviting businesses that you know, do have insurance to essentially dedicate the percentage of funds through Colin's process to a particular trust that's delivering back directly into the community. I mean, that's a very tentative discussion. I don't want to put Colin on the spot, but you know, those sorts of things where you can almost see a direct relationship back from your procurement spend to your own community for doing sustainability projects, I think offers some really exciting opportunities. So we'll work a little bit with Colin going forward on whether that makes sense.
Cheryl and I actually had a conversation around that on Monday. I think one of the first ideas that sprang to mind was like a community garden type initiative. And while we actually know charities who could put the work in that we could all remit funding to, I think the biggest hurdle is council consent when dealing with council land. So by no means an expert there, but that's potentially just one of many ideas that we could figure out that remit value back to the community.
Cool. Excellent, guys. I can't see any other questions in the chat, so I think I'm going to let you all go. We usually try and stick to 45 minutes. So thank you very much for coming. And we will circulate the link afterwards, and it'll be on our website if you know anyone else who'd like to listen to this. Thanks.
Sorry,
all.
Cheryl, can I just ask one question? I didn't realise I was using the chat. I'm sorry about that. Just
Oh,
a
no,
really
that's
quick
okay.
question for Adriana. Kia ora, Adriana. I'm just got a question for you about the local board funding, because I have successfully put in a application for a community art project in the past, and it fell over because I wasn't a not-for-profit trust and I didn't have anywhere for the funds to be deposited into. So I'm just wondering how that works with what we've been talking about today, because if I put in, I've got a couple of ideas I'd love to put in, and one isn't actually in the food wastage space. So, but I'm just kind of conscious that, you know, as a business person, you know, how does that work? Who do I need to work with to get them the funds through? Because that seems to be a bit of a sticking point.
Jackie, thank you so much for that question. Usually we only give up to $1,000 for individual people who want. May I ask, how much did you ask for? Was it more than that?
Yeah, the community art project, I think we were successful, maybe 3 or maybe even 5. I think it was a reasonably good amount of money to get this project done.
And you were just an individual, or did you do it under an umbrella organization? Because that's usually the tricky bit. If you work in partnership with a umbrella organization, say for example, Grant might be able to give you some suggestions of some groups that he's worked with, you'd be successful. We do only do $1,000 for people who don't have an entity or aren't registered. So I'm sorry to hear that that's not happened to you.
Yeah. Just to come in as well, Adriana, the funding guidelines are really clear that limited liability companies or businesses can apply, and there's no kind of restriction in the guidelines on what you could fund them to do. There is if you aren't a legal entity, if you're just an individual, but maybe that's something to take back to the board, and for the board to be really kind of clear about, if you're a business and you're applying for these funds, you know, are you going to be successful, or do you get ranked lower down the list than trusts?
So you don't get ranked lower down from trusts. What tends to happen is that we have an advisor, which tends to be Shamila, who talks to the people that, or the grant applications manager, who talks to the people that send the application through, and everyone's assessed in the same way. Things that tend to come out are if you're not in the location of interest of Waitemata, if you have already received funding in that year, or if you're getting funding from other entities that sum up the money that you're trying to look for. Those tend to be the consistent reasons of why they might not be getting as much money as they intend to. But I'll definitely give that feedback back, and I'll keep an eye out for you, Jackie. Sorry,
yeah, thanks, Adriana, because yeah, it was Shamila that was in contact with me, and I wonder if it was it's the differentiation between business versus individual, and I think that wasn't communicated to me clearly, that if I could have, I've got 3 different businesses, so I could have put it through any one of them, but I mean, it didn't have to go into my personal account, so that's really great to have that clarified. Thank you very much.
And look, Jackie, I mean, as Adriana said, the board does tend to like to have applications from not-for-profits, and even though they might subcontract it to someone who's going to actually do the work, that's kind of implicit in their application kind of process. So umbrellaing, actually taking a project to an existing environmental group or a trust, and working alongside them in a kind of social enterprise way, often offers an opportunity for businesses as well. So yeah, bear that in mind. particularly, there are some well-known trusts across the Waitemata local board area that are probably looking for opportunities of working with businesses. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Grant. I appreciate it.
Awesome, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Cheryl.
much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ka kite, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Ngā te wā.